in Daniel 11:23. We're continuing on through these verses. The league was made in verse 22. And we pointed out that the league was made in verse 23. And on page 11 of your notes, where you have type, that's from Uriah Smith's Thoughts on Daniel Revelation. And I'll read that first part. It says, having taken us down through the secular events of the empire to the end of the 70 weeks, the prophet in verse 23 takes us back to the time when the Romans became directly connected with the people of God by the Jewish League, BC 161. From which point we are then taken down in a direct line of events to the final triumph of the church and the setting up of the kingdom of God's everlasting kingdom. The Jews, being grievously oppressed by the Syrian kings, sent an embassy to Rome to solicit the aid of the Romans and to join themselves in a league of amity and confederacy with them. Now, we're placing in this, what we're following here, we're placing the league in our history at midnight. And what the brethren that first come across this application are emphasizing in here is that there's something that is going on with the Jews, which is Seventh-day Adventists. There's something that is represented by the Syrians grievously oppressing them. Okay, they're going to make a case that this is the problem that's being manifested by Russia. Okay, that is forcing, that's creating the circumstances where the Seventh-day Adventist Church is going to reach out to the government of the United States. So I'm just pointing that out to you that's going to be the argument. And down below in your notes, where it says anti-type, I'm just going to read their overview. We'll march through these verses, and then we'll bind that off. And I don't know exactly when we're planning on quitting here today. Does someone give me some light on that?
You have two presentations, an hour and 15 minutes, then take a break, then an hour and 15 minutes, then we're going to have light supper, and then after supper it's either question and answer or we can have another session. It's up to everybody. It's whatever you want.
Probably after your light supper, questions and answers is better for me. But that means that if we can get through this, then we can start dealing with Actium in the second presentation, some of the other issues. Okay, so under anti-type on page 11, I already told you what I'm suggesting about 161. The league takes place here. The deceitfulness that it's accomplished, 158, that's what's on the chart. It says the Adventist Church enters into a league or confederacy with the government of the United States at midnight. We've already understood that, not necessarily that it was a league and confederacy, but we understand from the story of Christ, and he's the example of all things, that the faithful that are going to be persecuted are going to get persecuted in a similar fashion that Christ was persecuted. And there was three entities there. There was Judas, there were the Jews, and the Roman authorities. So when you come to our midnight, you need to see those three entities. And the Judas typifies the false priests of this movement that are fully under the control of Satan, because the tares are bound first. They're going to be bound here, totally under the control of Satan. And if you want a point of reference for that, you go into the story of Judas. Okay, when Judas got up from the Last Supper, a demon took possession of him. Okay, so that's the false priests of this movement. They're going to come into connection, and I hope to show this when we deal with Panium. They're going to come in connection with the Adventist Church at that point in time and go together to the government authorities and accuse you and I, hopefully, of sedition and blasphemy. Okay, this is a sign of the abomination of desolation that precedes the siege at midnight cry. What do they mean by that? They mean that in this history here, what I was just suggesting to you, that the definition of the image of the beast is when secular power is used to enforce religious dogma. So you have a church, the Adventist church, the religious, seeking a religious punishment for the dissidents in its midst, reaching out to the government. That's the image of the beast. when the civil power is being used to enforce or sustain religious dogmas. So you've got an image of the beast marker here, which is the sign of the abomination of desolation. It's a sign of the civil power being connected with the religious power, where it's standing where it ought not. The sign of the abomination of desolation that precedes the siege at midnight cry. Another witness for this confederacy is Naboth's vineyard, where Jezebel, apostate Protestantism, works with the elders in Naboth's own city, Adventism, to have him killed for condemning the image of the beast. I won't deal with that one, but you don't need other. We have several lines of this threefold union here. By the way, if you're not familiar with the process of the priests, the Levites, and the 11th hour workers, and fractals, then this may seem kind of strange what I'm going to say to you, but if you can see this threefold union right here, it's typifying a threefold union that's going to take place here at the midnight cry, and it's typifying a threefold union that's going to take place here at the Sunday law. There are going to be different players in each one of these waymarks, and they're addressing different groups of people, priests, then Levites, then the 11th hour workers. But the characteristics that you find here are going to be repeated here and here. Okay. The reason for this confederacy is God's people are being oppressed by the Syrians. This, in the league with the Jews are being oppressed by the Syrians. So they're going to try to give you light on what that means. The Syrians oppress God's people at midnight. To understand who they represent, we can look at Daniel 8:9, which shows the little horn waxing great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. Syria was the land in the east, and it was conquered by Rome in 65 BC. Persia west versus Eastern Rome was the key that unleashed Islam under the first woe. Does everyone know that story? In this movement, this is public record. Okay, there's a war between the East and the West that depletes the power of Rome and the Persians, and when their power is depleted at the end of that war, that's the rise of Islam, of the fifth trumpet, the first woe. So part of the story, the key that brings Islam into history is this war between East and West in the time of Muhammad. Okay, that's what they're referring to here. The same took place during the Cold War, where Russia in the east opposed the United States in the west. So they're saying that this Persian war that opened the door to Islam of the first woe was typifying the struggle that came to an end in 1989. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, the next waymark you see is 9/11. Islam's back in history. This is a matter of public record that this is how we understand it. And the Cold War, specifically the Afghan War from 1979 to 1989, was the key which empowered radical Islam to strike at 9/11. Hence, the Syrians that oppress God's people at midnight typify the Russians. This can also be seen in Daniel 11, verses 11 and 12, which identifies that after defeating the United States at midnight, the king of the south, represented by Russia, shall be lifted up. Okay, so what they're saying is that there's three lines now of a struggle between East and West, and Russia being the East, the United States being the West, and that what we looked at earlier from verses 11 and 12 is that this king of the south, once he's prevented from desecrating the temple in Jerusalem, he goes back and accomplishes a persecution against Sabbath keepers in Egypt. Okay, so now they're going to deal with verses 11 and 12, and I should just look at this first. All right, I'm going to read this. I went over it, but they add some more insight to it than what we discussed this morning. This is this rebellion of the southern king in verses 11 and 12. In the literal history, the lifting up of his heart and pride led to the king of the south, Ptolemy Philopator, a pagan king, to seek to enter the most holy place of the Jewish temples, something no pagan king was permitted to do. the most holy place is where the ark is located, which contains the law of God. God's law is the basis of true religious liberty, James 1:25 and 2:12. When Ptolemy was repulsed, he initiated a persecution against the Jews in which many 10,000s perished. Thus, an event is brought to view in which Russia will pass laws or pursue a course of action that constitutes an affront to religious liberty. This is hard. This is of this study. This was the hardest part for me to internalize. It may be accurate. It's just I've had a difficult time seeing how Russia could implement religious liberty laws in Russia that would somehow. Yeah, no. I'm not denying that it's already happening. I don't know how what they're doing in Russia brings about the motivation for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the United States to reach out to the government of the United States. But things will be different then. The United States will just have been defeated by Russia. Things will be in a crisis mode. And we know that Satan is trying to bring God's people into a position where they can be persecuted. So maybe there is something to this that Satan's going to take advantage of. But this is of this study that we're going through here. This is the hardest part for me to click on in my head, how it works. These laws will be oppressive to Adventists and possibly other denominations and will lead them to seek the aid of the U.S. government. The U.S. government, which will itself be consolidating its forces in order to mount a revenge attack after its defeat in Daniel 11:11, will support the Adventist Church, whose interests will be suffering under Russia's oppression. This consolidation of economic and military power is brought to view in Daniel 11:13. The number 13 represents rebellion. If you know that the number 13 represents rebellion, say amen. Okay. It is identifying this rebellion by the Adventist Church at midnight at one level, and America's rebellion against its God-ordered Constitution from midnight to the midnight cry. This union or confederacy with the government of the U.S. government constitutes a fulfillment of the image of the beast, which is a sign that must be seen by the priest prior to their being besieged at the midnight cry. They're saying that we're going to have to recognize this threefold union image of the beast in this history. And if our head is buried in the sand, we're not going to recognize it, and we're going to be on the wrong side of the issue. The priest, Christ, at this time will be viewed as a treacherous element and become the target of the U.S. government on account of the fulfillment of their prediction that Russia, by then a declared enemy of the state, would defeat the United States. So we've been talking about what kind of prediction we're going to give in here and in here over the past year or so. And we may very well have a specific prediction. I don't want to downplay that, but the reality of it is as we're studying out this particular passage in Daniel 11, we're given a prediction. It's not like we're walking up and say, okay, here's a prediction. Thus saith the Lord, this is going to happen, this is going to happen off the top of our head. We're just unfolding this message, and it is saying that Russia is about to defeat the United States. And if that does come to pass, you can see some angry people that are going to be looking for people to blame. Anyway, there is a very good logic in that. This persecution will take place in union with the Adventist conference structure, the Jews, and the foolish priest, Judas. These foolish priests are being prepared to fulfill the role of Judas by the false latter-rain message that begins to bind them off at midnight. An element of this false latter-rain message is the rejection of the truth that the king of the south in Daniel 11, 5 through 16 is Russia. The U.S. government, the Adventist organization, and the foolish priests make up the threefold enemy that oppress God's people at midnight. Now we're entering into a consideration that some of you may not be aware of, but I'm going to at least put it in the mix. I'm going to try to show that Panium not only ties together this line of history. Okay, this is, to me, this is the waymark in this passage that allows you to bring other lines of prophecy together. It's the anchor, so that you can see the sequence of events in history. But not only that, Panium is the prophetic symbol that brings in the omega apostasy. Once you see what Panium represents, then you can see that in the very history where the seventh seal, the final revelation of truth for God's people, is being opened up, that at the same primary symbol in that seventh seal is warning us that the omega apostasy has arrived. Okay? So most of us probably haven't even considered that we're going to have an omega apostasy in this movement or whatever. You know, it's outside the realm of our consideration. But what I want to alert you to is that in this particular study now, in this movement, there are different applications that are being applied to some of these histories. Right here, what these brethren in Africa are pointing out is they're placing an emphasis saying that the tares of this movement, the foolish priests, that they're bound off on this side of midnight, okay? And that they're bound off, they're set for eternity as lost over here. And what leads them to that final decisive moment is that even before they get there in this history, there begins to be a counterfeit latter rain message that is the strong delusion of 2 Thessalonians that they begin to partake of. Okay? And the way that you can demonstrate that, if you're willing to see it, is that we understand that Ezekiel chapter 8 gives an illustration of a 4-step escalating progressive development of apostasy, so to speak. Okay, the first test in Ezekiel 8 is the image of jealousy. The second is the secret chambers. And when we trace out the secret chambers, it represents spiritualism. Okay, when Jesus in Matthew 24 says, "Go you not into the secret places," is that what it says? When Sister White comments on that in the Great Controversies, she says the secret places are spiritualism. And then you have the weeping for Tammuz. Okay, and the weeping for Tammuz is a counterfeit latter-rain message, and it comes here in this step. And then the fourth step is the 25 men that are bowing down to the sun. Okay, so this is midnight. And this 25 is a symbol of this history here that leads to the midnight cry. So this is the first point of reference to show that in this history, those people in this movement that are on the wrong side of the issue, before they get to midnight, they're going to get bound off permanently before midnight, but before they get there, they're in the period of time where there's a false latter-rain message going on, and they're beginning to partake of it. Okay? So now I'm saying that to you for this reason. There is now some in this movement that would at least infer, maybe even directly say, that this here, which I'm calling the strong delusion right here, that doesn't come until over here. Okay, and that the strong delusion that's poured out upon the foolish priest takes place after midnight. Okay, so there's beginning to be nuances in this message that I contend are placing the history here over here. And when you do that, when you start thinking of the consequences of that, it changes the whole prophetic model. It just does, because it's saying that your probation really doesn't close here, it closes over here. Now the reason that that's worth considering, I'll give you 2 examples. If you can remember last night by the logic that I put out, that William Miller opens the first seal, the judgment hour message, and the 7th seal is opened by Samuel Snow, and the 7th seal is the final seal that leads to the close of probation. Okay? And that we're going to repeat that history. And that our first seal is Daniel 11:40-45. And therefore, when our 7th seal is open in this movement, it's going to be bringing the message of Daniel 11:40-45 to perfection. if this is true, and I think it is, then you should find that some of the things that existed in the first seal, in the first revelation of Daniel 11:40 to 45, are also going to occur in the last seal. And what I mean by that is that the first major argument about the presentation on Daniel 11:40 to 45, the greatest resistance to that message came from this part of the vineyard, okay? From an institution that's around here, almost within walking distance, all right? And some of the characters that used to lead out in that institution, their big argument is that Pippenger's wrong saying that the glorious land is the United States, because the glorious land is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay? That was the argument, okay, that came from this ministry in this neck of the woods. So my point is, as in Wales, within days after this message was presented publicly for the first time in Holland, within days there was a paper out saying, no, the King of the North in Daniel 11 in those verses is not the United States. The King of the South is the United States. So right off the bat, there's an argument once again about which is the glorious land. It's the same argument, only different. Okay? Another argument that another brother from this neck of the woods, someone that you know, I used to work with him, and I would frustrate him because he'd say, you know, I believe everything you're saying, but why do you keep telling everyone that probation closes at the Sunday law? I know it's true, but why do you have to say that? And I'd say, well, because this is a shut door message, my brother. And so we never did settle on that, but he's just an example of what all of Adventism, that was always a problem. You're saying that our probation closes at the Sunday law. God isn't like that. God's more merciful than that. And I would always stand my ground that, no, that's the heart of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11, is verse 41. It's the understanding that the next thing to happen is the Sunday law, and your probation as a Seventh-day Adventist is going to close right then and there. And if you don't get your character prepared in advance of that event, you're going to be lost for eternity. That is the very strength of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. So my point is, that was one of the arguments. One of the arguments, the primary argument, is the glorious land the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or is it the United States of America? And here, as soon as this opens up, you got a similar argument. Is the King of the North the United States, or is it the King of the South? And this argument here. Does probation close here at midnight, or does it close somewhere in the binding off after midnight? That's coming into this same history. So I'm saying that even the controversies, there's a passage I know some of you know where Sister White says, old controversies will be revived, okay? Now we think it's old controversies from the Millerite history, and it is, but it's even old controversies from this reform movement. They're being revived now that the 7th seal's opened up. And the reason I'm taking time to tell you that is because it's this issue about, is our focus here and now before midnight, or is our focus after midnight, that is, to me, the essence of the Omega apostasy that's among us now. So I'm at least alerting you to that as we lay out this history. Okay, so, and these guys in Africa, for whatever reason, they obviously see that too, because the last thing I read, they said, an element, I'm on the 4th paragraph on page 12, towards the end of the paragraph, an element of this false latter-rain message is a rejection of the truth that the King of the South in Daniel 11, 5 through 16 is Russia. Now, I'll give you another, just so you get my point. In these 2 approaches to this message here and now, one of the arguments is over the sign of Jonah. Okay? And there is a teaching that the sign of Jonah is for us as priests. Okay? That we have to understand what the sign of Jonah is, and the sign of Jonah is going to be at midnight, and you and I better know what the sign of Jonah is. But when you look carefully at the Bible and Sister White's comment on the sign of Jonah, the Bible's clear all by itself, but Sister White agrees with it. The sign of Jonah was given to a wicked and adulterous generation. Okay? So if you're going to say the sign of Jonah is something that you and I need to understand, then you're saying that we are the wicked and adulterous generation. Okay? And I would argue that we are not the wicked and adulterous generation. We're the generation in 1 Peter chapter 2 that says you are a chosen generation, a holy people, a priesthood, because he even speaks about the priesthood. So there's suddenly, with the sign of Jonah, this is part of the story. It's about here. But just so you get my point, when you go into the sign of Jonah and you read it in the scriptures, you'll remember this. We're not going to go there, but I just want to point you to it. That Jesus said in those sermons, he says, because this wicked and adulterous generation, this is a paraphrase, would not receive the sign of Jonah, which was his preaching, he says, the Queen of Sheba is going to rise up against you in the judgment. And then she even said, Nineveh is going to rise up against you in judgment. Okay, because that's where Jonah went, was to Nineveh. Okay. So when it comes to the sign of Jonah in the New Testament, two classes of people that are going to rise up against you is Nineveh and Egypt. Nineveh is the king of the north, and Egypt's the king of the south. Okay, so when it comes to this presentation on Daniel 11, understanding the distinction between the king of the south and the king of the north is something that's going to rise up against us in the judgment if we don't have it on, if we don't understand it correctly. Okay, so why I'm saying that is, this particular message, if it is the seventh seal, and if it does open up the Omega apostasy, it's going to be very deep and very broad, and you really have to put your thinking caps on and start studying this out for yourselves. Okay, so moving on. That's just some thoughts. The U.S. government, the Adventist organization, and the foolish priests make up the threefold enemy that opposes God people at midnight. At midnight, the king of the north is described as becoming strong with the small people. When viewed in the light of the history of the French Revolution, the consolidation of wealth and power in the hands of a small elite group is brought to view. The history of the French Revolution is present truth. Much of the dynamics that led to the revolution are currently at play, and the revolution itself is repeated at midnight, while the reign of terror is repeated at the midnight cry. So there was a sister during our lunch break that was showing me something off the web where they're saying that Ivanka Trump was being, I don't know that she was doing it, but the press was putting her in a false light where she came out in this really fancy dress, and then they showed a refugee that's wrapped up in rags, and then they suggested that what Ivanka Trump was saying is, let them eat cake. You know where that comes from? Marie Antoinette. Okay, so all I'm saying is, even in the secular press, they're seeing this populist movement as Trump as a parallel to the French Revolution, and Sister White is clear that the French Revolution gets repeated in this history, and prophecy is proving it too. So it's happening right in front of our eyes. So they're going to quote here from Education, page 228, which says, at the same time anarchy is seeking to sweep away all law, not only divine but human, the centralization of wealth and power, the vast combinations for the enriching of a few at the expense of many, the combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of the interests and claims, the spirit of unrest of their interests and claims, the spirit of unrest, of riot and bloodshed, the worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution, all are tending to involve the whole world in a struggle similar to that which convulsed France. The point they're making is that in the French Revolution there was a consolidation of power and wealth, and that's what we're saying is being illustrated in here. Power and wealth. If you remember, he's raising up he's going to come with an army and with riches. There's going to be a consolidation that happens in this history. And I have a rule of thumb. My rule of thumb is this. If one person starts falling asleep, okay. But when the second person starts falling asleep, then we have to wake you up, okay? So just remember that. Right? Okay. So This consolidation of wealth that leads to the crisis typifying the French Revolution takes place between midnight and a midnight cry. This is also Genesis 41. You know the story of Genesis 41? Yes? Well, what is it in Genesis 41 that we're talking about? 7 years of plenty, where Joseph gathers together the 7 years of plenty, because what happens at the midnight cry? 7 years of famine. Okay, so this consolidation, the consolidation of Joseph in Genesis 41 is being placed right in this same history. There's more than one witness that this takes place at this history. To me, it means that we can expect some kind of economic growth, boom. I mean, I know most of you we're in the same age group roughly. Some of you are younger, but I mean, we're the same age group. I know when I grew up, I always heard the story that before World War II, it took a wheelbarrow full of money in Germany to go in and buy a loaf of bread. Okay, but as soon as Hitler starts building his war machine, Germany becomes the most productive economic powerhouse in the world. And you've heard arguments that that's why Roosevelt let him attack Pearl Harbor, because he knew it was going to get hit, but he let it get hit because he knew it would start the engines of industry building this war machine. Whether that's true or not, that's before my time. But prophecy is saying that this is going to happen in here, consolidation of wealth in order to build up for the war that's coming. He shall work deceitfully. This rebellion against the Constitution will be accomplished through deceit. Flattery and deceits are the characteristics of Tiberius, who in the prophetic line of 4 Roman emperors typifies Donald Trump. Okay, verse 24. And the type that they have is from Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation. And verse 24 is, he's going to do what his father's fathers have not done, and he shall enter peacefully. I don't think we need to read. You can read Uriah Smith afterwards. The summation of that in the middle of page 13 says, Rome conquers in a manner formerly unknown through treaties. In connection with this is the redistribution of wealth to new territories. That's the summary of how Rome took control of the world. And their antitype is this. The characteristics of entering peaceably to conquer is brought to view in the history of Tiberius, who in the line of the 4 emperors typifies Donald Trump. I showed you this in advance. In verse 24, what they're dealing with, it says, he shall enter peaceably. But up in verse 21, where it's talking about Tiberius, who we're identifying as Trump, he says, he shall come in peaceably. So even though it then drops back and tells us about the league here, it's saying that this is Trump. This is the work of Donald Trump. Okay, and what's he going to do? And in his estate shall stand up a vile person. Okay, they quote it. He shall do that which his fathers have not done. The founding fathers and presidents of the United States have not attempted to establish a dictatorship through the abrogation of the Constitution. But Trump will do this. Do you know that the spirit of prophecy backs that up? Because she identifies that we're going to go into a time period of tyranny and despotism. And if you look up what the word tyranny and despot means, it means a dictatorship. She's clear we're going into a dictatorship. Do you know that she says that we're going to have a civil war? Do you know that the United States is no longer the 6th kingdom of Bible prophecy after the Sunday law? Okay, it's not. It's gone. Now it's the 7th kingdom of Bible prophecy. My point is, if we're going to have a civil war, we have to have a civil war while we're still a nation. We're getting gobbled up into the 10 kings at the Sunday law. So there's got to be a civil war in here. And why do we have a civil war? She gives us 2 reasons. One of them is economics. There's going to be poor people, rich people. Another is race. She says it's race again. That's going to come in here, brothers and sisters. It's got to come in here. And what they're going to argue is in this period, Donald Trump is going to be setting aside the Constitution and going into despotism, as Sister White would say, a dictatorship. So that's established already in this message. So this isn't anything new that they're saying. But Trump will do this. The defeat at the hands of Russia at midnight will give impetus. Now, if the United States is defeated right here at the Battle of Raphia, do you think that the environment of the United States would be of such a nature that they can implement martial law? Okay, that's what they're saying here is about to happen. The defeat at the hands of Russia at midnight will give impetus to this development, creating the social and political circumstances that will generate enough support for far-reaching revisions to the Constitution. Islam plays a role in accomplishing this, and someone asked me during the break, and I want you to understand, everything that we've been speaking about Islam over the past several years, we're not turning away from that. It's not like we don't acknowledge that any longer. It's just that this passage is talking about the sleeper. The sleeper is that Russia was the king of the south. But it doesn't change the fact that at the midnight cry, Islam is going to strike the United States again, and it's going to be doubly as hard as it did at 9/11. It doesn't change the fact that it's going to strike again at the Sunday law. And at this point in time, the United States falls, according to the story of Balaam. Okay, here, it's going to cripple the United States. So you get the United States crippled here from Islam, even though it's just taken Russia out, and you have the perfect environment for a dictatorship to come into history here. Islam plays a role in accomplishing this, and it will at this time, midnight, be forming a caliphate preparatory to launching a significant attack against the United States at the midnight cry. See the lines of Revelation 9 and Balaam. How many know what we just read? Do you understand why they're saying that Islam is going to form a caliphate at midnight? You do not know that. How many don't know that? Okay, when you go into Revelation chapter 9, you have a time prophecy of 391 years and 15 days. You probably have to go into 8 and 9, all right? And this has to be very abbreviated on this. But this would take a whole study by itself, because I'm thinking how I have to lay it out. I got to go into Luke chapter 1 and get into the birth of John the Baptist and his father and so on and so forth. So I don't know how to succinctly lay it down. But in any case, let's put it this way. Keep it simple. You can test and see if it's been established. What has been established is that from here to here, you have the characteristics of the first 4 years of the 391-year, 15-day time prophecy. Okay? And those first 4 years were from 1449, that's 1449, to 1453. And in July 27th, 1449, you have a beginning of a time prophecy that goes for 391 years and 15 days. And that time prophecy ends on October 22nd, 1844. Pioneers thought it ended on August 11th, 1840, but they were incorrect, because there was a prophet that was raised up named William Foy, who recorded a vision in 1842 that says the sixth trumpet has not yet finished sounding. The pioneers thought the sixth trumpet ended on August 11th, 1840, but William Foy said no, it was still sounding in 1842. So the pioneers were off on that. But the sixth trumpet stopped sounding on October 22nd, 1844. And we know that from August 11th, 1840 to October 22nd, 1844 is a 4-year period. Therefore, in this time prophecy of 391 years and 15 days, you have a 4-year period that is marked at the end, and Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. And you can go and see that the pioneers marked a 4-year period at the beginning of this time prophecy, from 1449 to 1453. Okay, so if you have a 4-year period at the end and a 4-year period at the beginning, it's giving you two witnesses that these 4-year periods are prophetic characteristics that need to be applied. The justification for me plugging them into midnight in the midnight cry takes more study than I am willing to do at this time because of time. But what happened in 1449, July 27th, 1449, is that there was a caliphate that was put in place. And in the middle of this history, in 1451, Muhammad II decides that he wakes up at midnight. Every historian says he wakes up at midnight, and he decides that he wants to conquer Constantinople. And by 1453, he has done so. Therefore, you can take this history on several prophetic witnesses and plug it into midnight, to the midnight cry, knowing that at midnight, there's going to be a caliphate formed in the United States, or in the United States, in the world. And just imagine, who would you think would be the primary point of reference to establish a caliphate in terms of nations in the world today? Would it be Iran? Okay. Do you know what Iran's doing right now? It's poking Trump in the eye. Okay, it's just pushing Trump. So what would happen if Trump responds to Iran? Would that be something that might bring all the Muslim horde together into a caliphate? Okay, now if you're not familiar with this history, if you don't know what we're speaking about here, brothers and sisters, this history is very significant because in 1449, you're at the very end of Eastern Rome. And the leadership of Eastern Rome is in the capital city of Constantinople, and they know they're surrounded by a bunch of Islamic sultans, and they're threatened. So what do? They hire the most famous cannon maker on planet Earth to come to Constantinople and build them a cannon to prevent them being overrun by Islam. Okay, we're close to 2 people sleeping. And they're broke though. The Eastern Roman Empire is broke. Okay, so it can't pay this cannon maker. So he goes to Constantinople and he waits to get paid and get to work. It never happens. He gives up. He's starving to death. So what does he do? He reaches out to Muhammad II and says, I'll build you a cannon if you want. And he does build him a cannon. And that is the cannon that blows down the walls of Constantinople. And this history is typifying the history of midnight to the midnight cry. So at midnight, it's not just about the king of the South Russia. It's about Islam causing the kings of the earth to fear. Okay, normally when we talk about Islam causing the kings of the earth to fear, it's because they strike. Okay, they strike the ships of Tarshish at 9/11. They're going to strike again at the midnight cry. They're going to strike again at the Sunday law. But at midnight, there's no justification for saying that they're going to strike. Because in the story of Balaam, they just strike 3 times. But at midnight, they're going to cause the kings of the earth to fear, not because they strike, but because the kings of the earth are going to wake up to the fact that there's a caliphate, that just a worldwide caliphate has been put together with the purpose of carrying on and completing the third jihad. But what it is telling us is that someone from our side, so to speak, outside the Islamic world, is going to be hired to make them a bomb, to blow down the walls at the midnight cry when the United States is hit doubly hard. So you got to ask yourself, what kind of cannon is he going to make? Is it going to be a cannon with cannonballs? Or maybe some disgruntled nuclear scientist that just got fired by Trump about 3 weeks ago?
They already know how to make a bomb. Iran already knows how to make a bomb.
Yeah, they may already know how to make a bomb. There's something about this history, about someone from the Roman Empire, from that side, going and creating it. Okay, there's something about that history that's there. So anyway, the only reason I diverted there is to let you know, when we're talking about Russia being the king of the South, attacking the United States, Sister White has a statement where she says, in the last days, wars will rage. Okay, it's not simply Russia. Islam is still involved with this. It's going to be much more, you know, it's the statement where Sister White says, no human, something like this, no human pen can describe the magnitude of the ordeal that's before us. Okay. We could read Genesis 41, 54 through 57. It's in your notes, but we already understood this. Joseph is gathering to consolidate his wealth. And of course, this is inconsistent on the last sentence of page 13. This consolidation of wealth in here is consistent with the idea that the United States is going to reach a point where it can forbid the world to buy and sell unless they have the mark of the beast. So that means they got to take control of the economic structure in advance of implementing that rule. And what they're suggesting here is that Rome conquered in a way that had their fathers and their fathers' fathers had never done, and it was through treaties, and that Trump is going to be accomplishing the art of the deal, and he's going to make America great, and he's going to make the people that come into alliance with him great. But in that process, he's going to end up controlling it. And he's going to be controlling it for his lover, I guess is what you'd say, the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, because she's the one pulling the strings behind it all. Forecasting devices from a stronghold. If you go back up into Uriah Smith, he points out something on the previous page. You don't have to, but what he quotes is that this word against in the verse, in verse 24 of Daniel 11, where it says he shall forecast his devices against the stronghold, this word against can also be translated as from. And that's the way Uriah Smith applies it, other people applies it. It's saying that Rome controlled the world from its stronghold, the city of Rome. Okay, and in the scriptures, the city of Rome is the stronghold of Rome. Okay, when pagan Rome was in the city of Rome, it was invincible. When Constantine moved the capital of the empire from the city of Rome to Constantinople, it began to fall apart. When the papacy ruled from Rome, it was invincible. But the papacy received its deadly wound in 1798 when it was taken out of Rome, and the Pope died in exile. The sanctuary of strength for Rome, whether it's pagan Rome or papal Rome, is the city of Rome. But the sanctuary of strength for Rome typifies the sanctuary of strength for the United States. And the sanctuary of strength for the United States is not a city, it's the Constitution. Okay, so this is the point that they're making here. America's stronghold or sanctuary of strength is its Constitution. Forecasting devices from strongholds is identifying the manner in which Trump will use, or rather abuse, the Constitution to achieve the political end, establishing himself as the sole dictator and grant himself the powers that will be exercised against those who will not receive the mark of the beast, and grant himself the power to force them to follow America's example. Even for a time is 360 years. This commenced with the Battle of Actium. We have this up here already. And the Battle of Actium saw Octavius, Augustus Caesar, and Antony consolidating their forces preparatory to a decisive conflict. This is the Battle of Actium, and history says that Mark Antony and Octavius were building up their armies before the Battle of Actium. Thus saying, if this is the Battle of Actium, that once again the main antagonists in this war will be building up their riches and their militaries in advance of this war. Daniel 11:25. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast their devices against him. So here in this history, they're building up not to the battle of Panium, but to the battle of Actium. And once again, who's going to lose here at the battle of Actium? No, Russia, the king of the south. Mark Antony has come into alliance with Egypt. It's the king of the south that gets defeated here at this battle. Okay, and they say here, it's just, okay, that was 25. Let's see, Uriah Smith. Okay, A.T. Jones. Okay, we don't need those. We've already discussed these concepts under type, where they summarize it in the middle of the page 14. It says, the war between Antony and Cleopatra, king of the south, and Augustus Caesar, king of the north, the battle of Actium, was quickly followed by the conquest of Egypt. This is something I had never recognized myself. Battle of Actium, 31 BC, conquest of Egypt, 30. The actual moving to Constantinople, 329, or that the law or the pronouncement he was going to move is 329. The actual move 330. So you've got a period there for that point. We used to just treat it as a point. Octavius' victory at Actium also marked the establishment of despotism, as he thereafter became emperor of the Roman kingdom. Now, do you know what they mean by that? Is that when Julius Caesar was assassinated, there was a triumvirate, if I'm saying that right, formed. Consisted of Lepidus, probably not pronouncing that right, Mark Antony, and Octavius. Okay, but Julius Caesar had formed one of those triumvirates too. And in both cases, they turn into dictatorships. Okay, Julius Caesar ends up being a dictator. And in the second triumvirate, once Mark Antony's killed at the Battle of Actium, then Octavius is the dictator. So when you get to the Battle of Actium, Lepidus is already dead. That's one of the three. Mark Antony dies. It leaves Octavius. It leaves a dictator right here. Okay, thus marking despotism in our history. And you can see the graphs here. And go to the next page. Page 15. The United States mounts a revenge attack and defeats Russia. This is typified by the Battle of Panium, which is marked at the Midnight Cry. Verse 26. Yea, they that feed at the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. This is talking about Mark Antony being destroyed, and Uriah Smith says this about this verse. The cause of Antony's overthrow was the destruction of his allies and friends, those that fed at the portion of his meat. When he gets in this battle, everyone deserts him. People that had been his associates. It says first, and it's interesting, Uriah Smith knows nothing about the number 4 as we do. So these people have went through here and bold-faced these 4 steps that Uriah Smith points out. These are the 4 steps of the progressive destruction of Mark Antony. First, Cleopatra, as already described, suddenly withdrew from the battle, taking 60 ships of the line with her. Secondly, the land army, disgusted with the infatuation of Antony, went over to Caesar, who received them with open arms. Thirdly, when Antony arrived in Libya, he found that the forces which he had there left under Scarpus to guard the frontier had declared for Caesar. Fourthly, being followed by Caesar into Egypt, he was betrayed by Cleopatra, and his forces surrendered to Caesar. Hereupon, in rage and despair, he took his own life. Antony completely defeated, and Egypt is taken by Octavius. His fall took place in 4 steps. The number 4 is a symbol of scattering and destruction. So who just died there in 4 steps? Russia. Russia's gone right here. Russia and its allies will be completely defeated. Another type is 1989, when after the collapse of the USSR, Gorbachev gave his support to the United Nations. I already put up there 1793 to make that point, right? So Daniel 11:27. And now in the Battle of Raphia, check it out. Almost before the battle's over, they have a peace treaty, okay? If that's valid, then it's probably a waymark of this history. Because after you get to verse 24 and it talks about even for a time, then it's repeating and enlarging on this history that leads to this battle. And now it's going to talk about the king of the south and the king of the north sitting down at a table, Putin and Trump sitting down at a table in theory, lying to each other about what their intentions are, because they know both of them are trying to deceive the other side. So in verse 27 it says, "And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed." And the time appointed is here, the Sunday law. Because this is the Battle of Actium, and it's 360 years it takes you to here. So somewhere in this history, they're going to be deceiving each other, and the type you can see mentioned on page 15, but I'm going to pass by that, Uriah Smith, and take the comments on the bottom of page 15. "The king of the north and the king of the south publicly portrayed themselves as friendly to and supportive of one another. But behind the scenes, both parties were intriguing for universal dominion. The pact or treaty of mutual support was ratified by Antony's marriage to Octavia, but this pact failed along with Antony's marriage to Octavia." Okay, so do you know what that means? That Antony had married Octavius's sister, right? And they're saying that that shows a peace treaty that was formed between the king of the south, Antony, and the king of the north, Octavius, a peace treaty between the United States and Russia that was all fake. Okay, so if there's a peace treaty here right after Raphia, then they're suggesting that that's what's going on, lies on one table, but both of them are still planning for this battle here of Actium or Panium. And they're building up their forces for that very event. The antitype before Actium, Trump and Putin will hypocritically feign amity between themselves and the countries they represent, as they are now doing. But behind the scenes, both parties are intriguing for supremacy. While suffering defeat at midnight, Trump and the United States will be victorious in the end. The marriage between Octavian and Mark Antony is in the first fulfillment, identifies treaties or pacts between Russia and the United States. The time appointed is the Sunday law. Verse 28. This verse here has beat me up for years, but I think now I can understand it, or I have a little bit of comfort about it. Verse 28 says, "Then he shall return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land." Uriah Smith's going to talk about two returnings. And he's going to say, where it says, "Then he shall return into his own land with great riches." This is after the Battle of Actium. Okay, he's got the riches from Egypt, and if you go into that history, how's it read? When they brought the riches from Egypt after that battle, there was an economic, what did they call it? Not inflation, deflation in Rome, because they brought so much booty from Egypt that the price of goods dropped. That's how much booty came from Egypt after that battle, the historians talk about. But there's two returnings in this verse. The other returning, his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. Those exploits is the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Okay, so there's two returnings. And here's, you can read this very same thing I just said from Uriah Smith on Thoughts on Daniel, Revelation 278. It says, in the summary of it, on page 16, the close of probation on the Jewish nation and subsequent judgment, destruction of Jerusalem. So, in verse 29, and this is where where I say these two returnings beat me up, because there's going to be, in verse 29 and 30, there's going to be some returnings, okay? But the two returnings in verse 28, the two returnings in verse 28 are what? The returning after the Battle of Actium to Rome to celebrate the victory over Mark Antony is one returning. And the other returning is when they came back after destroying Jerusalem, after they attacked the covenant people. Those were the two returnings. So now these verses are going to talk about, the following verses are going to talk about returnings. So verse 29 says, at the time appointed he shall return and come towards the south, but it shall not be as the former or the latter. When is the time appointed? You guys seem to be getting a little bit sleepy, and we're almost done with these verses where we can start commenting on them in a different way, so hang in there. When is the time appointed? Okay, so now there's going to be a returning at the Sunday law, but it's not going to be as the former or the latter. What's the former? The victory at the Battle of Actium. What's the latter? The destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, so there's a returning going to take place at the Sunday law that's not going to be like those two returnings. That's what verse 29 is saying. You follow me? Verse 30. For ships of Chittim shall come against him. Who are the ships of Chittim? It's the Vandals. That's the second trumpet. But who do they represent? Islam. Okay, so right here, it's bringing in this third strike of Islam. Right here, at the time appointed, the ships of Chittim are going to attack again, the third time. They've attacked at the midnight cry. They've attacked it at 9/11, because Balaam is going to strike that ass 3 times. Okay, so for ships of Chittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. What's the indignation against the Holy Covenant that would take place at the Sunday law? The Sunday law, right? What is the Holy Covenant in this regard? It's the Sabbath. Okay? So shall he do, he shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. Who's them that forsake the Holy Covenant? Pardon me? Protestantism. Is it Protestantism or is it the papacy? Pardon me? Okay, so let's see if they have the type. Let's just put this in. Let's go back, and how do we apply this to the history of pagan Rome and papal Rome? Okay, in verse 30. If we're relating this to pagan Rome, and in verse 31, it's going to introduce papal Rome. That's the way we understand it. Verse 30 is the conclusion of pagan Rome, and it's transcending into papal Rome. What's the last mistake that pagan Rome makes in the verse?
Indignation against the Holy Covenant?
No, that's not the last. He have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. Okay, when did pagan Rome have intelligence with them that forsook the Holy Covenant? Justinian. Okay, when you say Justinian, what does that mean?
Where he grants them.
That's the decree of Justinian. When was that? 533. Okay, and it makes the Pope of Rome the corrector of heretics and the head of the church. Okay, so that is the type. And then in verse 31, it switches to the papacy. So who does pagan Rome typify at the end of the world? The United States. Okay, so who's going to have, who's in this battle? Let's just say it that way. As we're walking down through here, who's the one that has just defeated Russia at the Battle of Actium? This is the United States. So what's the United States going to do down here at the time appointed? When it says they're going to have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant, who is the United States going to have intelligence with? Papacy. Okay, and now from verse 31 onward, it switches to the papacy. And it says, an arm shall stand on his part. Who's the his there? The papacy. Who are the arms that are standing up for the papacy at this point in time? This is a trick question. The UN. It's not the United States. It's the seventh kingdom right here. The United States is gone. An arm shall stand on it. It's the main king of the 10 kings, granted. But it's the seventh kingdom. An arm shall stand on its part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. Right here, they're going to pollute the sanctuary of strength. What is the sanctuary of strength? The Constitution's fully and completely overthrown at the Sunday law. And they shall take away the daily sacrifice. What is that? That's what it says. And shall you got to, when you read verse 31, the first phrase you need to repeat each time. It says, an arm shall stand on his part, and the arm shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and the arm shall take away the daily sacrifice, and the arm shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Okay, so what was the daily that got removed in the history of pagan Rome? Paganism. It was the established religion of that history, and it gets Protestantism. You saying that Protestantism's gone here? Yeah, Protestantism is gone here. But what is the representative of Protestantism? The United States. Is the United States gone here? Now, how many of you are aware that in the structure of Daniel 8, you see a counterfeit sacrificial offering in Daniel 8:11? If you're aware of that, say amen. Okay, so go to Daniel 8:11. It says, yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the hosts, and by him the daily was taken away. But this taken away is different than Daniel 11:31. This taken away is room. It means to lift up and exalt. Okay, so here it's saying, yea, pagan Rome magnified himself to the prince of the host, to Christ, and through pagan Rome, the religion of paganism was lifted up and exalted, and the place of pagan Rome's sanctuary, the Pantheon temple that was located in the city of Rome, was cast down by Constantine in the year 330. There's the history there. But in the structure of Daniel 8, you see here that the papacy is the counterfeit priest. And there's an offering going on here in verse 11. Okay? And the offering is paganism is being slain as an offering, and it's being lifted up and exalted by this counterfeit priest, the papacy. Okay? This is being repeated right here. The offering is not only Protestantism, it's the United States of America. Protestant America has been slain at the Sunday law, and it's being lifted up by the papacy as the trophy. This is Protestant America. Now I've got my trophy. Okay, and the daily, the religion of the realm, is gone. It's taken away.
We just had a William Miller moment.
You had a William Miller moment?
Oh, we did, because you just told us that the daily was Protestantism. Just like he figured out that the daily was paganism. Well, that's for me.
Okay.
Maybe not even
Okay. I never. All right. Good. Let's move beyond that one. So we're in. We're almost through this. How long have I been going? About an hour and 15 minutes? Okay, let me go till 3 o'clock by that clock.
That's fine.
And then, okay, I want to get through this so that we can go back to Paneum.
Yes.
Okay? So in verse 31, the United Nations stands up for the papacy. Seventh kingdom of Bible prophecy, the Constitution is destroyed. Protestantism is taken away. Now all 7 of these women have accepted the name and the clothing of Catholicism, Isaiah 4:1, to take away their reproach. And the 8th kingdom of Bible prophecy is placed, because right here, brothers and sisters, these kings agree to give their kingdom to the beast for 1 hour. And this 1 hour goes until the universal Sunday law. That's the 1 hour of the threefold union of the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet. Okay. All right, I'm on page 17. They're going to mark that right here. This is typifying 330, as we've already put in place. And under antitype, it says, following the Sunday law, the United States and the world government that will establish begin to decline. This declension is represented by Constantine's removal of the seat of the empire from Rome to Constantinople. And once that happens, the 7 trumpets of Revelation begin to blow, and they begin to take the Roman Empire apart piece by piece. Okay, so that's what's being implied here. Now everything's going to come falling down. And that's the story of Nimrod's Tower of Babel. Sister White talks about there's tower builders in this our day. And she's talking about this evil confederacy of the beast, dragon, and the false prophet trying to build a one world government. But the story is found in Nimrod's Babel. And as they're trying to build this tower to heaven, it comes falling down around them before they get done. Okay, so they're right here. They put the 8th kingdom in place. Now it's going to fall apart. The kingdom's been divided. The trumpets are starting to blow. That's what these brothers are suggesting here. So now, if you're not familiar with it, we have understood that in this history, if you can see this history up here, that the first 4 trumpets of Revelation, they align with this history. This is the first trumpet, 1989. The second trumpet is 9/11. The third trumpet we have taught for quite some time is the midnight cry. But these guys are going to argue, these African guys are going to argue that the third trumpet is midnight. And the 4th trumpet is the midnight cry. And when I challenged them on this, they said, no, that's not what we're saying. And I realized, hey, what they're saying is valid. When you, as we've done it, when you take the trumpets and you just mark them with the waymarks, they seem like a singular point. But what they're saying is this first trumpet goes from here to here. And the second trumpet goes from here to here. And the third trumpet goes from here to here. And the 4th trumpet goes from here to here. So the 4th trumpet, it is the Sunday law right where we put it. Okay. Now, the reason that this is interesting is who the trumpets represent. Okay. You can see in the breakdown on the bottom of page 17, when the Goths, the first trumpet, came into Rome and attacked Rome, the first trumpet, the Goths then formed an alliance with the Romans. Do you know that history? First, the Goths attack them, but then they come into an alliance with Rome afterwards. Okay, so these brothers are suggesting that this is the alliance that takes place in 1989. Okay. The second trumpet is the Vandals out of Africa, but the Vandals, they're a naval trumpet, and they set up their main naval base where? In Cyprus, Carthage, which is called Chittim. Okay? And they're a symbol of the destruction of the maritime trade in the Mediterranean. They're cutting off the financial structure of Rome. And it's the ships of Tarshish that go down, that are brought down by Islam, that cut off the financial structure. So we place the second trumpet at 9/11, when the ships of Tarshish are sunk by an east wind. Okay, but what's interesting is that the third trumpet is who? Attila the Hun. And when you trace the history of Attila the Hun back to his geographical beginnings, where does he come from? Russia. Russia. Here's another witness of Russia here at midnight during this history. Okay? Now there's more, there's a nice little thought connected with this as we go one step further. Here they're saying is the fourth trumpet, which is Odieser. And this is what brings the conclusion to the kingdom. So what I'm saying is I don't have a problem with initial reading when I seen these guys putting the trumpets here. I was thinking singular point in time. But if you're talking about a period of time, it doesn't change anything that we're thinking. But what it does do is it puts another witness for Russia right here. Okay, but that's not the part I want to get you to. You go to page 19. We'll read their comments, and then we'll read A.T. Jones. It says, the events of Daniel 11:23 must be understood in connection with Daniel 11:11, which identifies the battle between the United States and Russia that will ultimately be won by the Russians. A type of this development is the following application of the first four trumpets. The Goths, the first trumpets, represent the events of 1989 with the alliance between Rome and Alaric's successors, typifying the alliance between the United States and the papacy. The Vandals, second trumpet, represent Islam and its attack at 9/11, which brought an economic crisis upon the United States and the world. The Huns, the third trumpet, represent Russia and its attack against the United States at midnight. This is in agreement with Daniel 11:11. Attila is described as wormwood, illustrating the bitter experience this defeat will bring to the United States. The Urali, the fourth trumpet, represents events at the midnight cry. It is under this trumpet that the sun, moon, and stars, the three branches of the U.S. government, are smitten. Okay, in here, this is where the Constitution's overturned. You got a dictatorship, and the three-form of government of the United States is removed. Where did I leave off? This is typifying the overturning of the Constitution at the midnight cry, image of the beast crisis, and the establishment of tyranny and dictatorship. A secret preparation is identified in the history of the first four trumpets. Now, students of prophecy, listen to A.G. Jones. This is pretty interesting stuff. This trumpet describes the work of the terrible Attila. Okay, we're saying the terrible Attila comes at midnight. Okay, with his Huns and allies. While the Vandals, this is the second trumpet, 9/11. While the Vandals under Genseric, the great burning mountain, for 40 years were destroying the Roman power by sea. A.T. Jones is saying that from 9/11 to midnight, it's 40 years. Can we put a 40 between 9/11 and the midnight? Oh, absolutely. But notice what he says. For 40 years we're destroying the Roman power by sea. There were other clans of barbarians confederating in order to strike a decisive blow against the same power by land. All Europe and a part of Asia had been aroused to the great struggle for the mastery. Many tribes are rallying to the standard of Attila, and the Romans are preparing to repel their terrible foe. Attila anticipates that his best trophies are beyond the Alps. At the sound of his war cry, all Europe musters to arms. Since Xerxes led his immense army against the Greeks, no greater body of warriors had ever assembled to act a part in the fulfillment of prophecy. The engagement that succeeded, the Battle of Chalons, is recorded as one of the four decisive battles of history. My point is that Attila strikes at midnight, and he's been 40 years in preparation while Islam has been harassing the United States since 9/11. And that number 40 is pretty profound. It's saying, if it's accurate, that since 9/11, Russia has been preparing to attack at midnight. I don't doubt it either. Okay, we got through that. Let's take a break and come back and consider Panium. Heavenly Father, we are amazed at your prophetic word and the history that confirms that word, and the current history that also confirms this application. We know that there's things that we're not fully understanding, some things that we're misunderstanding, and we want to have a clear and accurate understanding of truth at this time in Earth's history. We ask that your Holy Spirit would continue to enlighten us, help us put the right emphasis and focus upon these things that you're bringing to our attention, that when we share them, that we can do it in a winning fashion. Also help us to allow the Holy Spirit to take the seriousness of this message into our hearts and minds, where we see the necessity of surrendering the things in our lives that are preventing us from being fully used by you. We want to be prepared to be the wise priests in this coming history. We don't want to fall under strong delusion and spend this time seeking to understand these things only to find out that we're lost. Give us that motivation to fulfill our responsibility as students of your word. And we thank you for the time that you've been spending here with us this Sabbath day. In Jesus' name, amen.